And it's a very good afternoon to the Sportzfan Radio panel and special guest today, Leesa Catto. Good afternoon, Leesa.
How are you today, this beautiful Sunday?
Yeah, isn't it magic?
Good to be with you this week too. Sorry about the COVID striking me and missing a week.
No, that's okay. Good to see that you've managed to kick it off and you're up and about again.
Yep.
Look, what we really wanted to talk to you on, you know how we love talking about AFLW on our show.
Absolutely.
Since we last spoke, there's been negotiations between the AFL and the AFLPA about a new CBA, an agreement covering the women. There are a few sticking points, but fortunately they've at least managed to sign one that sees the next season start at the end of August.
Yes.
As far as you're concerned, I guess the first one is 2 seasons in 1 year. What are your thoughts about that?
Not ideal at all. I actually really wanted, well, I would have liked and thought it made more sense to start season 7 later this year, at least to be able to, I thought that if it's going to be August, if that's decided to be the best fit for the AFLW for however long, like it needs to have a spot where it's better for the players, etc., for the weather-wise, health-wise, then I thought this season coming, I didn't think there'd be a 12-month or more gap. I thought that won't happen for the AFLW. So I thought late October, November, just to start this season, to get this season underway. However you manage it over Christmas, you have a week off, you do whatever you do, just to get this season played so that you can ideally start at August next year. So to me, it's not ideal. It's not much of a break for the players at all, for the clubs, for the staff. It's pretty hard. You know, there's a whole heap of things like players who are going to be drafted who are still in year 12, you know, all these kind of things. There's a whole lot of issues. So it's not ideal timing, but the AFL were keen to go with it. So go with it we are.
10 games. The AFL wouldn't move off there only being 10 games. And I've heard a number of players saying that it's not, and they use a terrific word for it, they don't feel it's a legitimate season now with 18 teams in and there's only 10 games.
100%, absolutely. So this has to be the only year where there's 10. If there's 10 again after this, like we've got 18 teams, absolutely, 10 games is not enough. It's not enough for the players to develop. Like this year, for example, AFLW will be played when there's no state leagues. So where do players go when there's no football to be played, like in terms of their development? There's a whole heap of questions around it. So, okay, it's 10 games this season, but there's been a lot of players on social media, you know, just really questioning this. How can the development come if we can't play more games? There's more teams, etc. So, yeah, 100% it needs to be more than 10, Mark.
How long do you think it'll be before, and let's say for legitimacy, each team plays each other once, so that'd be 17 games. How long do you think it'll be before there's actually a full round of matches where each team plays each other once?
Well,
I know that's like asking how long's a piece of string.
No, but you know, you'd really hope want to see that sort of in the next few years. Like that's a big jump from where we're at, but I'd really want to hope to see that. What are we, 2022, sort of 2025, 2026? I don't know if that's realistic, but I'm sure that that's what the clubs and players would want, you know, to have a fair competition, to develop the game as a whole. Like it really needs to get up to that 17 games sooner rather than later.
Judge, you got a question?
Yeah, Leesa, I'm bemused by the AFLW system at the moment. It seems that people like yourself are involved in the decision making. It seems like the women's game generally isn't involved in the decision making. It seems that the AFL themselves are making all the decisions. Do you know who's actually directing things in relation to women's football at the moment?
Well, look, that's an excellent question, actually, to tell you the truth. Not really. I did have a chat with Brian Walsh from the AFL recently. He's one of the executives in there, and just talking to him, like his sort of involvement and knowledge around it, I felt really quite comforted by the fact that he was involved in it. He had a genuine care for it. I think a lot of it would fit with, obviously there's Nicole Livingston, but she's not at the executive level. So her portfolio reports to her portfolio, along with also Laura Kane and Brad Scott's portfolio, report to, trying to think who it is now. So I think there's like a number of people in there who are the decision makers, but yeah, there's things that obviously that we all from the outside, you know, aren't happy with, obviously.
I just get the impression.
Doesn't really answer your question, though.
No, it doesn't. But it sort of reinforced what I think is happening, and that it's chaos is reigning, and I just can't see the sense of the 2 seasons in a year, two short seasons in a year. But the season starting in August, it just makes no sense to me, and I just wonder whether this is an experimental idea where they'll just see how it goes, because I think it's got mud written all over it. If the AFLW is going to, from here on, start in August and build their 10 season, 12 season, to 18 games. Yeah. God, so they'll be playing in the middle of February. It'll be a disaster, heat-wise and just health-wise, and so I just wonder what the direction is.
No, and that's a very good question, because that's why we're moving the season, or, a big part of why we're moving it away from where it was like from the start for that weather-wise. So if that's the case that it's going to end up back there, then that's I mean, footy, let's face it, footy's been traditionally a winter game, ever since footy's been played. Mm. So why not play it then? I know they talk about the clean air between AFL and AFLW, the broadcast. There's a lot, but what is the best time for the game? Maybe they're starting this August season this year, not just in relation to footy, but in relation to sponsors and keeping the interest in the game. I think there's a lot of factors.
Well, just to take the clean air point, and that's your perception of it, but that's one of those philosophical issues, i.e. the women's game should be separate from the men's game. But that's also confusing the messages of the AFL, because they've got 18 teams of the existing teams. So they want to brand the game as a sort of a adjunct to the men's game. Then to say, well, you want clean air for sponsors and all the rest of it. Well, that again seems to me to be a mixed message. And I've just got a belief that the AFL have really stuffed this up in terms of what they're really doing with the women's game. And I can see tears before bedtime, Leesa, with all of this. I think the women eventually will say, hang on, this is just not working out for us. How do you see it?
Yeah, look, maybe. I know that look, I think the sooner, and I think it's great that the pay rises that they've got, which have been, like, when you look at the numbers, it's pretty good compared to what was a very low starting base, though.
Yes.
The sooner they can be full-time or able to just study and concentrate on their footy, say, for example, the better. So if that takes us across the 12 months of the year. Now, when is the best time to play? If winter's the best time to play the game, because that's the best time to play footy, that's the best footy you're going to see, or whatever it is, that it needs to be, that is what we're doing with AFLW. What's best for the game, not just what's best for where does the AFL think it'll sit in around the year. You know,
do you have a feeling as to what the women themselves want? Do they want their game to be played during the winter season, or do you think the women have got an inclination towards the summer, which is what's happening?
No, I don't think they've got an inclination towards the summer. I think they've really struggled under the heat with the summer. And I think that, you know, the players would say that themselves. They've been used to playing, most of these women, unless they're from the NT, they're being used to playing like in our winter months. You know, that's when they've played their footy. So this is all new to them. This has all been a change to them to say play over summer. And it's been pretty hard.
Leesa, I'm a country person, and I note that the women's game in the country is really going well and progressing very well. It seems to me that one of the advantages is the same advantage that netball has always had with football, where you have the men's game and the women's game going side by side. It creates a very good social atmosphere in the clubs. And I think the same's been developed with the women's game in the country. But if this is going to be a whole different change where the women's game has clean air, as you call it, separated from the men's game, played at different times of the year, I actually see that being problematic. Just wonder if you do.
Well, it's an interesting one because initially I wasn't such a fan of having AFL like an AFLW together.
Right.
Say people had said, why don't you play Essendon Richmond AFLW, then you play Essendon Richmond like all on the one sort of day. One, say AFLW first and then AFL, for example. And I thought that can take away from the AFLW because people won't, it's a longer day. People don't necessarily want to come along and see two games. There's a whole heap of things that I thought I wanted to see AFLW as a standalone sort of product so that people can just go and see that. I agree with you 100% about the country stuff, like absolutely, or even in the city with, you know, in a football club, having men's footy and women's footy together where it coexists is fantastic. And that really, it's great for the club. And I think it's great for the game. And essentially that's what we've got now at AFL and AFLW, but how do we make that the best we can for both AFL and AFLW? I think AFL, the product of AFL, like is, you know, that's a whole separate question. I think that how that's managed, that's obviously run through the traditional footy year, how long that season is, etc. Should we have AFLW played through winter? That, you know, in terms of a spot for women for footy, winter's where it should be played, in my opinion. How that looks though, does it look like double headers? Does it look like it's played, you know, as standalone games or maybe a few AFLW games together? There's a whole heap of things I think that can be explored around this. It's not to say that August necessarily is the right spot for it. So, yeah, you could be right. Maybe this is another, like, trial. Is August the right time?
If I can just, Leesa, Paul Dalligan, I do the rugby league segment. I was just going to make some comments on the women's rugby league competition. It's very, I guess, in its infancy. There's only 4 teams. Makes sense that there's 6 rounds. They play each other twice, the 3 teams. Peter V'landys would be one of the more bullish sports operators in the country, but rugby league's taking a softly approach, and it's growing exponentially, and it's working really well. Now, AFL's a 3-hour game. Rugby league's a 2-hour game. That might be why it works so well. But I would say the opposite of diminishing the women's game. I think it increases its importance when they're playing before the NRL because the audience share is just going through the roof. Everyone's interested in participation rates, and the growth of the game will be through growth, not just we're just going to add a team for the sake of it.
Yep. Okay. Well, so. I see that there's a Carlton girl who has just signed for one of the NRL teams, NRLW. Chloe Walker, is it? Or Chloe Dalton?
I'd have to check on that, but that's interesting.
no.
That might happen more. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it may well. She's encouraging more girls to go. She's from, I think she was traditionally from Sydney or from an NRL background, so she's gonna play. So that's going to be very interesting to watch that. Do you think that the crowds will come in early to watch the women's game? Is it, and how long before the end of the women's game and the start of the men's game is there on the day? Because traditionally in AFL, there's been an issue with the AFL teams or the AFL wanting the curtain raiser to finish, I think it was up to 90 minutes before the start of the men's game so that they could get on the ground and warm up and stuff. There are a lot of issues around this, Paul.
You're looking at, that's where the 2-hour game difference comes in, because if you're getting a big break, you're looking at 6-7 hours of sport there if you play the women's AFL before the men's, whereas with the league, it's pretty much, there's not a big break between them at all.
Okay, so that's something I'd like to see, like if we do have curtain raisers or if the AFLW is first, then there's this major gap, or there has been, between the start time of the finish time of the women's game and the start time of the men's. So that would have to be kind of worked through for it to work. But also the longer times in AFL, I don't know how much does it really lend itself to people going nowadays to watch 2 games.
But you'd miss out on Brian Taylor walking around the rooms for an hour, asking inane questions, and Dermot Brereton just rattling on. What a shame.
I think with things we could do without.
Definitely.
Leesa, hi, I'm Sarah, by the way. Sorry, I tuned in a little bit late.
Hey, Sarah, how are you?
Not bad, how are you?
Good, thank you.
You made a very good point about the Carlton player. It was Brooke Walker who's decided she's going to sign with the NRLW club, because Chloe Dalton, she's an Olympic gold medalist for the rugby sevens. She would be one of the players I would pick that maybe made that switch in the future. You were seeing a lot of already AFLW sort of kick-started with players who came from another sporting background or have played in other sports at the same time while playing AFLW. How do you reckon that's going to look as expansion clubs continue to grow, but we're also seeing other sporting codes grow? How do you think that's going to affect the AFLW?
That's a good question, actually, because they'll still be looking for those kind of cross-coders, I guess, in AFLW to try and lure them, and the CBA maybe will lure some with the financial increases. I also think footy's got to, footy is in AFLW's got to sort of really scour from within as well. There must be so many players, I think, that can become AFLW standard in VFL, in the other state leagues, in some of the community leagues. But they really need to work on recruiting, I think. So that's a part of. I know, for example, say Melbourne Football Club, some of their people, they just go to the ends of the earth to identify players, and I'd like to see that with the other clubs as well, because I think there's plenty of good players out there within who are playing Aussie rules, but also the cross-coders will still. There'll be more of a bit of a battle for those cross-coders, though, Sarah, as you say, because there's more sports now that are paying more money that want to have the best athletes on board.
If I can just jump in, I've done some snappy research. Brooke's actually coming home, if we could put it that way. She played rugby sevens and even won a gold medal, if you don't mind, at the Rio Games in rugby union. So she's gone from rugby union to AFLW. Now she's back to what I say is the better code, but union and league is a much simpler transition than AFL and rugby league, and vice versa. If you want to ask, Israel Folau might be Exhibit A.
Leesa, just to take on Sarah's point of the cross-coders or the multidisciplinary, it seems to me that, and that's been an extraordinary feature of AFLW, how many girls are coming from other sports and have been very good at those sports. I get the impression that a lot of them would like to, in fact, retain both sports. You know, if they've been in netball, they'd like to play AFLW and go back to netball. This changing of the season to the August situation, I think, will actually disrupt a lot of people, because I think there's no certainty about how they can actually go back and play their other love, which I think is actually a great thing, that people are involved in more than one sport. Do you have a view on that?
Look, that you could well be right. I know that the Irish girls were having to contemplate what they were going to do in terms of playing Gaelic footy over there in Ireland, or whether they'd come back, and a lot of them are coming back, I guess, because they're paid for it, plus the lifestyle here. But yeah, it's certainly an issue. I mean, I guess where any time of the season or of the year might become a clash with something, you know. But you're right. It's great to see those players that love to play the highest level at this game and the highest level at that game, like Brazel, say, from Collingwood. She's in the Australian netball squad, so she couldn't fulfil her Collingwood commitments, understandably, because she's off with the Opals. The Diamonds, for example. So yeah, that's always it is a pity, because you'd love to see them at both doing two of their sports at once. It's something that we don't get to see with the guys when they have to make, or they seem to have to make the choice. You know, when we see, say, cricket and footy, or whatever, basketball and footy, or whatever it may be. So it is unique to the women's game, if we can keep that. There's a lot of things that are going to change over time when we go to the longer season, you know, when they become full-time pretty much. Then those opportunities to play those second sports, and also this kind of, I just think AFLW is such a massive community buzz and community sport, even though it's at the elite level. Where it is at the moment, where it's played on those grounds, it's like the vibe is amazing. Now, how do we keep that as we go forward to become more full-time athletes, longer seasons? If we're going to play double headers, say, at the G with the men and women, there's a lot that we want to, there's a lot, I think, to like about AFLW at the moment in terms of the vibe, I suppose. Like if we go back to the movie The Castle, or The Castle, you know, the feeling, the wonderful feeling of that for sport is just, at the moment, it's something that, like, for me, it's far surpassed AFL in terms of, would I go to AFL or AFLW, and what am I more invested in? AFLW would be the answer, even though, say, for me, Essendon hasn't had a team. But that's just, obviously, I've been involved in women's footy for such a long time. How do we keep that? How do we, you know, there's a lot of things that I think that, and it's being managed. Is it being managed really well? There's, you know, how do we maintain the feel that we've got for AFLW?
Have you got any idea of the or wish list for the new CEO of the AFL, Leesa? Who you'd like to see in that role?
Sarah, are you free?
I am free. Always happy to sort of help out here and there, especially like just listening to what you were saying before, the vibe. I'm participating in footy at a local level has been just so amazing for me as a person and other people, especially through COVID, because you heard so many horror stories of a lot of men's football teams that might not have had that vibe you were talking about, and maybe not having that support. Whereas I've felt and heard through a lot of women's female football communities, they were really getting around each other the whole time. And it's just, there's the one thing I'm sort of concerned about at a local level is now there's all this talk about when players start to get paid and how that might affect things, and what the sort of shape will be of grassroots sport now that more women are participating in all sporting codes at a level, which is something we really want to see. But I guess hopefully that helps with the community, and grassroots can really bolster everything up. But you've had a massive involvement in grassroots women's sport and women's footy, especially with the St Kilda Sharks as well. What sort of change have you seen in the vibe, as you said, over the last couple of years with the AFLW?
Well, before we go on to that, Sarah, I just wondered if you were free to take on the role of CEO at the AFL.
Always free. I reckon I'd be good as well. I'm a Hawthorn supporter. It's always been waiting for an AFLW team, so I know what it's like to wait. To just keep waiting to get my letter of employment.
You've got to put yourself out there. Then you'll have to go banging on the door and speak to Richard Goyder, and just say, "Here I am." And you see,
absolutely. Start updating my LinkedIn profile.
You've already said more than Nicole Livingston I've heard from in the last year.
Surprisingly quiet after she gets one of the biggest roles in AFLW.
She was up there announcing the big pay deal, but I could have done that. I mean, yeah, anyway, I'd hope she played a part in it, that's all.
Yeah.
Wasn't she commentating on swimming or something?
Yep.
Yeah, swimming.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a cross-coder for you. The chief.
It's interesting that, when she was appointed, I don't know if I just thought she'd sit on the executive, but she obviously doesn't sit on the executive at the AFL. So, I'm not quite sure. I think it's different people sort of treat AFLW differently in there. I was told that Steve Hocking, when he was there, he really treated it like, he goes, okay, if it's men's or women's is the same. Like whatever it is, it's got to be treated the same. You've got to put your same consideration into both. Now, obviously, he's not there anymore. How much, you'd hope that was the case across everything, but who knows? It's hard to say in there.
If you've heard the head of the NRL, it's not actually Peter V'landys, it's Andrew Abdo. When he speaks about the women's game, he almost he gets very emotional because he's so passionate about it. Whether you could say the same about Big Gill is a matter for debate, but it's great to have the head of rugby league, albeit the men's game is also the head of the women's game, speaking so passionately and pushing it.
100%, and that's what we need with AFLW. That's what we need. It's got to be the same. Like people have said to me, should it be run by a whole different organisation? Should there be a separate union for the women? Like all these kinds of things. And as it sits at the moment, it's under the AFL brand or AFL organisation, and it's all the 18 clubs now have teams. I think we're in really sort of crucial times to how this goes. And the sooner it gets to a fullest, longer season, the development of the players and the coaches, the staff, the salary, it's really I think it's sort of at a tipping point for AFLW now. Now that the 18 teams are there, it's got to be properly resourced across every team, because we know it wasn't properly resourced in year one by a lot of clubs, and multiple years by a lot of clubs. We know that it wasn't properly resourced. So, really, it'll be resourced properly, and we'll have a fantastic future for the game, or B, we won't be, it's not. And yeah, like you say, Paul, with other codes and athletes and players wanting to see what can I do to be a full-time athlete? Maybe my future's not in AFLW, maybe it's in NRLW. I don't know. I just think we're at such a, maybe it's in soccer, maybe it's in netball, basketball,
All right.
whatever.
Okay. Well, look, we might finish up, but Sarah, you were late to the party. Have you got any other questions for Leesa?
Well, I did, following on from, I guess, what we're talking about, the league expanding and what that's going to look like. We are also hearing talk about when Tasmania and Darwin are going to get their teams. Do you think that the AFL will look to expand the AFLW alongside those teams and try and work in more sort of development for the league? Or do you think they will try and take the AFLW at its own pace and focus on that a little bit more rather than bringing 2 expansion teams into the AFL and AFLW at the same time?
Look, I think they might bring another club into the AFL, whether that's Tassie first or NT first. I know that obviously the business case for Tassie, etc., and for NT. I don't think it'll happen for AFLW just yet. I mean, we've just got 4 new teams. Basically, since 2017, we've started with 0 and now we're at 18. So I'd say it'll be a while yet before we get any new teams in the AFLW. But certainly down the track, Tassie could be, an option, and maybe NT as well. But I wouldn't think, you wouldn't want them for quite a while now until we get the 18 teams bedded down and with good lists. And, it's taken some of the new clubs quite a while to find their feet in AFLW. So it'll be a while yet, Sarah.
Yeah,
I hope.
Fingers crossed. Some are still even finding their feet now. So I guess hopefully we can see a more sustainable competition growing in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. And it will be all these things that we've discussed today, like is August the best time? How many games is the right length? This is only a 1-year CBA. There's a whole lot more to play out. So there's plenty more to discuss as the season starts and, into next year, etc.
Absolutely.
I suppose, Leesa, there's one thing that all fans would be clamouring for, and that's some announcement of an AFL vision for how it sees the AFLW and where it sees it sitting, to cover all the things we've spoken about, because we're up to, as you said, season 7. We're going to start in August. I think those questions have been posed on this program for the last 5 or 6 years.
Yep.
Regrettably, we don't seem any closer to answers to a lot of those questions. I guess the good thing is that there's at least a step closer to women being full-time in the game with this latest CBA and the increase in salaries. I guess the tough thing for the AFL is that it had a very large increase in salaries to placate the women this time, saying, all right, we won't give you any more than 10 games, but here's a big salary increase. That won't be the case for the next CBA. So hopefully there'll be some good thought going into the future of the game for the next CBA.
You know what, Mark? I reckon you just said one key word then, hopefully.
Yeah, we've been saying hopefully for 5 or 6 years.
Like, what is the plan? Where is the vision? Is there one? There was a very good operator in an AFL called Josh Vanderloo. He was super strategic all over a lot of this stuff, did work in the women's game heaps before AFLW came along, and he was doing some other role. And he's gone over to Hawthorn now, and he's their head of AFLW. So I'll be very interested to watch their progress and their strategy, because, who's actually managing the strategy in there at the moment, I'm not quite sure. So hopefully we'll see something.
Well, if you want someone with a lot of talk, there's a rugby league fan from the Cronulla area who's looking for a job, ScoMo. He'll give you a lot of vision.
I don't think he'll help us.
He'll talk about it, though.
Paul, wash your mouth out.
He doesn't even follow rugby league. He's from Coogee Rugby Union anyway. Don't get me started.
All right. Look, Leesa, thanks very much for coming on. We really appreciate you giving us your time. You're a very clear and passionate voice in AFLW, and it's always good to have you on the show. And look, hopefully as we get closer to the new season, we'll get you back on and we can talk about footy actually being played rather than hypotheticals.
That would be awesome. Thanks heaps for having me, guys. Really enjoy the chat, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks,
excellent.
Yeah. See ya.
Cheers. Bye.
All right, Paul, NRL round 12 started Thursday night, and Schooner was red hot for his Seagulls, seeing as how the Storm had a couple of losses in a row, but it wasn't to be for him.
Well, I hope he didn't invest too much money, because you'll be buying the Schooners if he did. The Storm, they certainly didn't believe in that Queensland beautiful one day, perfect the next, because they lost 2 matches pretty badly up there in Queensland. But you reunite Cameron Munster and Jerome Hughes, and look what happens, boom. So they were back to their best. We watched that not long ago, Professor. They like a boa constrictor, the Storm there at home, but a pretty flashy one with Cameron Munster, who is playing for a new contract. How you could look at Cameron Munster and think this man's about to face a $500,000 pay cut is beyond me. You tell me, who's the hottest player in the AFL, gents? Can you, and Sarah, can you name someone? Just come up with a name.
Any St Kilda players?
What you're saying is that he's the top of the tree, Paul, this bloke.
He'd be in the top 3 players easily at the moment, if not the best yet. He's facing a $500,000 a year pay cut, and people are wondering why he's looking around. They prioritised Jerome Hughes, the halfback. There was a bit of talk during the week that Munster's only great when Hughes is there, and the stats actually support that. The Storm have a better winning record when Munster isn't playing. But when Hughes and Munster are playing, they're almost unstoppable. That may be why they prioritised Pappenhausen and Hughes and Harry Grant at hooker. They couldn't afford all 4. They prioritised 3 because when you offer someone on $1.2,750,000 a year, that is a $500,000 pay cut they're offering Munster. Now, they're scrambling around desperately trying to fit him in, but there's a man we know very well up there at Redcliffe with a dolphin on his polo shirt, and he's very keen on Munster. So I don't blame him. And he would be the perfect signing up there at the Dolphins.
Paul, just to take the analogy, I think the best player is Christian Petrarca. Now, for instance, it'd be just ridiculous for Melbourne to contemplate a $500,000 pay reduction for Christian Petrarca. I think, along with Gawn, is just the 2 of the players that they just need to be as, well, apart from last night, but rampantly successful as they have been. So this makes no sense to an outsider why it's happening with Munster.
It's very different too to Adam Reynolds every single week. Well, maybe not this week, but I wonder why we let Napoleon go, who was leading our army very well. That was to prioritise the youth coming through, and there was a worry about injury, and he was reaching a certain age when rugby league players can get seriously injured. We've paid millions in settlements to players who've medically retired, but there was no signs that Reynolds was slowing down. With Munster, they simply made a decision, perhaps due to his off-field indiscretions, but he's got his life in order. He's off the drink. He's got a young family, but they chose those 3 over him, and he quite rightly is looking to pursue his options. He may well stay. I mean, I don't think any player wouldn't mind being a part of this Storm team. Craig Bellamy gets the best out of everyone on his staff, and they win premierships on the back of not the superstars. It's the players who weren't that well known, and he gets the best out of them. So that, unfortunately for Schooner, Professor, would have been quite a reality check. And there was another reality check the next night on Friday for the Cowboys. The bit of talk about them perhaps threatening for the premiership. There's as much chance of them winning the premiership, I think, as me appearing in the next Armani catalogue. They just don't have it up against the big boys. They brought a water pistol to a gunfight. That's how they looked. They just had absolutely nothing in attack at all. So the Panthers were just brilliant at home. 22-0 they won. Very rare in these days do you get a 0 on the scoreboard, a donut. There's no Krispy Kreme sponsorship of the NRL because there's just so many points being scored these days. But the Cowboys looked inept. They'd almost be looking for a sponsorship by Viagra instead, perhaps. But 22-0 to the Panthers. They are looking red hot to go back-to-back, perhaps like your Demons were, Professor, before last night. Forgive me for raising that.
Just to break in there, Paul, I listened to Todd Payton's press conference. He quoted a completion rate of 58%. Was that because the Cowboys were off, or that the Panthers were exerting that much pressure that the Cowboys couldn't complete their sets.
Very similar to what we discussed, and the Bulldogs at the Storm, that they play so well that you start playing bad. So it does affect the way that teams play. That the Panthers are just one of the better teams we're going to see in many years at home, and the Cowboys' plan A went out the window, B went out the window, I think C went out the window as well. They just they didn't have anything at all that looked like threatening, just nothing. It'd be like me taking on George Kambosos at Etihad shortly, that or Marvel Stadium. They didn't have anything at all. So you can put your pen through them. I'm winning the comp right now. Well,
the other thing, Paul, is that they clearly didn't have the ball a lot, because I had a look at the stats. The Cowboys had 105, if you don't mind, 105 more tackles than the Panthers.
And that's got to wear you down, particularly when the opponent is so fast and so strong and so big. So they would just steamroll the Cowboys, and they would have gone with the proverbial tail between the legs back up there to North Queensland. That really was quite frightening for their fans.
And talking about the battle for Queensland, the Titans leading 24-4 at halftime, didn't score after halftime, but the Broncos did.
Did they? What? 35-24, the final score, and without Adam Reynolds, and also in the background, one of their superstar players were asking for a release, if you don't mind, Professor. So he's on $800 a year. There's a lot of $1 million men that seem to be getting around in the NRL these days, but his management said, well, we're out. And the club said, sorry. And they said, well, he wants a release, middle of the season. So you would have heard the booing from here when he ran out Payne Haas. I wouldn't boo him to his face. I don't think many Broncos fans would. But he must have told his management to say, we're out. And the talk is he wanted to put some clauses in about performance in the next few years. The club had to reach a certain level, or Big Payne was out. It's more about the money. He's on 800. He thinks he's worth 1 to 1.2. The club doesn't think he is, but he played like he's worth it. And the Broncos without Adam Reynolds were scarily good. And they have a player, Selwyn Probo, who we've mentioned on the show. He would be the most exciting talent since a Greg Inglis, I'd say. I'd even put him in the Pappenhausen League. He is freakishly good. He's 19, and the talk is whether he's ready for Origin, which is a gladiatorial sport of the highest order. I think when the teams are announced tonight, you'll see S. Cobbo named on the wing, unless Kevin Walters has had too many 4X up there.
Paul, the West Tigers led 12-0 against your Rabbitohs. Were you at any stage worried?
I was. I did send a message to my mate who I watched, the Tigers fanatic. We watched the last game together when the Tigers beat the Rabbitohs, and I thought they were going to do it again. And I suggested that this viewing is better than some other late night viewing that might be available in as many words. And he agreed. And then the Rabbitohs went and put on 40 points. So I think the highlight of that game for me was Michael Maguire after the game saying the Tigers can still make the top 8. That's like me, Professor. I used to play off golf, a handicap of 9 before I had kids. I might go and win the Masters, Professor. That's about the same odds you get. And you've also got the Knights who lost. They had to win the Knights. And I don't know what was in the Gatorade at Redcliffe Stadium where they played. I think this round should be Magic Mushroom round, not Indigenous round, because the Knights coach thinks they can make the 8. Give me strength. I mean, I'm all for confidence, but Anthony Robbins wouldn't have that much swagger. These two blokes just need a reality check. How about just get some more wins on the board, boys? Then you can talk about making finals. Come on.
Oh, that's right, Paul. But if you look at those two games, the last two we discussed, West Tigers leading 12-0, the Warriors leading 12-0. Surely fool's gold. Those two teams were never going to win.
No, well, the Knights got the win 24-16, but the Warriors aren't much chop. They've had enough, I think, of living in Australia. They're ready to go back to the land of the long white cloud. They just can't seem to make it work. And poor old Nathan Brown, he's already bald, but he would have gone bald if he didn't. He would have pulled his hair out by now. And then if we move on to one of the more impressive performances of the round, James Tedesco, if there was any doubt about him playing number 1 for New South Wales, he'll be first picked. He was freakishly good, back to his best. And his coach put it best, is that even with Origin camp, so he'll be in Coogee tonight with the Blues camp, but he played like a rooster last night and just demolished the Sharks, 36-16. The Sharks were at home. Many people were thinking they're a chance of finishing top 4. The Roosters were just way too good, and it was quite dominant, that match.
Paul, I watched Craig Fitzgibbon's press conference. He didn't seem to have any answers at all.
I tell you what he won't be considering is a career in stand-up. He's not the funniest man you've ever seen. I'd be scared to ask a question, I think. Craig, have you got? No, I will leave it, I think, because he's a pretty intimidating man. Very fit man, and it wouldn't have been nice for him up against the team where he played so long. And he was an assistant coach for about a decade, I think. So someone dared ask that question, how did it feel? And they were pretty much a better return to serve. You won't see this side of Roger Federer. He wasn't up for that question at all. And it was the trademark, every game we treat the same way. Thank you, sir. No more questions.
So, all right, Paul, today, 2:00, my Bulldogs playing Kevin Yapp's Dragons. What chance the Bulldogs?
Well, it's interesting. Just on Lisa's point earlier about the suburban grounds, I was actually born a kilometre away from where this game is on today, Belmore Oval. And what's quaint is it's on a train line and the train actually stops so the driver can have a look at the game as he goes past, or she, of course. And then it's so close to the train lines, they've often got to get the ball off the tracks. But it is pure Bulldogs fanaticism. And I think you'll win as outsiders because the Dragons have a terrible record there at Belmore Oval. So you can chalk up, I think, a win this afternoon, Professor. And if I was a betting man, I might even get a couple of lobsters on it.
Are you suggesting that to wind up Kevin Yapp?
Not at all, no. I just think that they'll genuinely win an Addo-Carr to score. And I might even trot out that bet that I did once, remember, Turbo to score 3 in Origin, and you all laughed like I was on the magic mushrooms, but he did it. The Fox to score 3, Addo-Carr. So there you go. Get that in your parlay, and then you dial in from the Bahamas next week.
What's the final score in your thoughts?
26-14. I think the Dogs will win that.
And at 4:05, the Raiders, who are knocking on the door of the 8, playing the Eagles. It's a big game, Paul, because if the Eagles lose, they'll be in serious trouble.
They are, but I think that they'll win this. They've just got a bit too much all-round class. The Raiders, very impressive against my Rabbitohs last week, but the Rabbitohs were up and down more than, I won't say it's a certain profession, but I think the Eels will have too much class today. In a tight one and a big scoring game, I think 26-20, the Eels should prevail. Mitch Moses, in the form of his life. Dylan Walker is playing exceptional, and we all know when there's a 6 and 7 playing well. One note of caution, though, for Eels fans is Jack Whiten, who's a freak, and I've mentioned many times, is competing with Nico Hines for the bench spot in the New South Wales team, which we named about full-time. So you might, if the Raiders win, I can tell you now Jack Whiten will be man of the match.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that, Paul. And State of Origin, the first game, number 1 on the 8th of June. Is that correct?
Coming up, yes. So they're going into camp, the boys, tonight. Both teams will be named. There's no nonsense where one coach waits for the other, then quickly alters his team. I think they're pretty much set in stone. Billy Slater and Cameron Smith are back to haunt New South Wales, this time as coaches. Billy Slater apparently is one of the better students of the game and incredibly thorough. So he is loved, thorough, and he is the biggest danger to New South Wales, who are strong favourites, is that he'll be very, very prepared to take on what he expects from New South Wales. A lot of injuries for New South Wales as well, so I'm not overly confident. It is good, though, that the first game is in Sydney, second game in Perth, third game in Brisbane. So I'm happy we're not going up there until game 3.
All right, Paul, thanks for that. Sarah, question for you. Would you watch a $1 million grudge match between Nick Kyrgios and Bernard Tomic?
To be perfectly honest, probably not. I guess it would be more of a point of why is the match happening? Is it purely just them trying to win the money, or is it to try and create speculation for people wanting to watch it?
I think you could call it, Sarah, when egos collide, or perhaps when alpha male behaviour interacts. Sportsbet already has the market on how many rackets will be smashed.
No, it gives me the sort of the feeling of when two boxing or people cross-coding in fighting think that maybe one's a better hitter. So you see a mixed martial arts and a boxer going up against each other. And that's like, you know, those really big spectacles that don't really make any sense, but are just there to settle grudges and keep people engaged. That's sort of the energy that I'd get from something from that. And even those I don't particularly care for either.
Well,
they could fill the crowd, though. I thought if they had Team Red and Team Blue, and that's the former girlfriends, you know, they could put them in different colours and they could sort of fight off. And, yeah, that's how they'd get a crowd.
Well, you could. Ads up on Tinder would help a little bit, I assume.
Sarah, you make the right point about boxing, because Bernard Tomic says, well, if he won't play me at tennis, then how about we have a boxing match? So it seems like every celebrity and his dog wants to have a boxing match with somebody these days.
No, it just seems like it's, just egos crashing. And you don't just see it in men's fighting, like you see it in women's fighting all the time as well. Ronda Rousey got very confident and up herself, and then I think she got the crap beaten out of her at one point. We haven't heard much from her since. But yeah, I've seen some really humble and really talented fighters, but they're never the ones that you sort of hear from the most. It's always the ones that really want to get their voice out there and want everyone to see them either beating someone up or getting beaten up.
I think Bernard Tomic, given he got caught once speeding 4 times in a day in his Lamborghini, should have been a drag race offer.
Fast and Furious.
Well, if you wanted a sideshow, it is magnificent, because I don't know that I've actually laughed out loud when I've been reading reports of what players have said, but in response to Kyrgios calling himself the world's best grass court player, Tomic's alleged to have said that Kyrgios was delusional to make a comment like that. And then Kyrgios has responded, because he's not going to allow that to happen without a challenge. He's then come back and said that Tomic's Australia's most hated athlete. So Judge, would you watch $1 million tennis grudge match or boxing match, winner take all?
I'm just trying to work out how much pain I would go through by actually setting myself on fire, Professor, but I've had a choice. I think I'd go with the fire option. Look, you and I remember the Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs farce back in the 70s. So this is just farcical of a person, namely Tomic, who was just deprived of attention. And how do I get some attention? Well, I'll take on Kyrgios, another big ego, and we'll throw the expression $1 million in. Then I'll get the media. Well, the media really should have a bit of a look at themselves, I would have thought. How about paying more attention to, the women's game, the women's football game, or something worthwhile? The fact that the media has been suckered in by this, I think is pretty ordinary, and it just sort of shows you how bad Australian sport, including tennis, is actually going, which we're seeing at the French Open at the moment.
I tell you, if it's a boxing match and Bernard Tomic's dad is in the corner, he's the one who once headbutted his son's playing partner. He brought back the wrong milkshake in Wooshka, knocks him out, breaks his nose. So I'd be worried if I was Kyrgios. It'd be like the WWF. Remember that Jimmy Hart would jump into the ring and swinging chairs and megaphones and stuff. So I just find it astounding. And one thing I don't like, on a serious note, is Kyrgios keeps referencing his charitable foundation, which is noble work, but you don't use it as some badge of honour to tell people I'm such a great guy because I've got a charitable foundation. That's supposed to be about the charity. You don't have to broadcast it unless you're trying to raise revenue. Don't use it in defence of yourself. He keeps saying, does he have a foundation about people that challenge him? Well, just do the charity work and we don't have to hear about it relentlessly.
That's a good point, Paul. And in fact, I've noticed that some of the American golfers, particularly the younger golfers, and Champ is one of them, that often references his charity. And I think it's not such a big deal, to be honest. And he's not pouring that much money into it. It seems to be the virtue signalling that it just goes now with modern athletes. They have to build up their social media profile as well as play the sport well. And to be honest, I'm getting a little bit sick of it because it's the essence of charity to do it anonymously. You don't go out and beat the drum about it.
And I won't speak ill of the dead, but we know some of those charities, some of the money even reaches those it's intended to. But it's another issue. Yeah.
Well, at least we can say one thing. It's one way of, like, neither of these players are playing in the French Open, but they've got their names in the paper more than the players that have.
Yeah. Tomic is playing in the tournament at the moment. It's worth $53,120 in total. And he got beaten in the first round. I mean, really, he doesn't. He just doesn't rate as a world-class tennis player anymore. It's as simple as that.
Speaking of world-class tennis players, the French Open, it's in both men's and women's singles into the round of 16. The men's side of the draw, very, very predictable. I don't think not that I can recollect. Seeds numbers 1 through 8 are all into the last 16. So if you're a handicapper, you've done an excellent job.
Professor,
and he's been saying last week, often an unknown wins the French Open, maybe not.
And 5 years ago, Professor, we were saying the exact opposite. We were saying how pathetic is the women's game because the top seeds always get through and nobody challenges them. But that's not the case now. So it just shows that you can never say at any point, the game's pathetic or it's never been worse or whatever. These things just go in cycles. But the number one women's player, Swiatek, seems like an absolute force of nature at the moment.
Well, yes, she's almost a lock. The women's draw totally unpredictable. The number one seed's through. The next highest seed in the final 16 is number 11. There are 5, if you don't mind, 5 unseeded players through to the last 16. Nearly a third of the players left are unseeded. So the numbers 2 to 8 in the women's haven't measured up.
Mark, is it also something to do with it's the French Open, which I think out of all of the Grand Slams is the most unpredictable, namely because of the crazy surface they play on.
Yeah. No, but that's Swiatek. I haven't seen a woman better with clay since Demi Moore in Ghost. She's been unbelievable.
Very good.
Geez, that would almost get the award for the zinger today.
Got a lot of vintage of pottery, that movie.
He was good last week, Professor, with the, I think the Eels are electric when they played last night. That wasn't bad, but that's good, Paul. He's brought his zinger count to 10 today, by the way, Professor, so reached double numbers. It's good.
Well, we haven't even finished the show yet.
It's like boxing. If you keep throwing enough, sometimes they land, Throwing them out there.
Interestingly, for Australia, Sam Stosur in the doubles has made the round of 16, and also Alja Tomljanovic. They're both they're not playing together, but they're both made the final 16. So Australians represented there. And Sam Stosur also in the semis of the mixed doubles with Australian Matt Ebden. So we've got a few Australian players doing well, but in the doubles side of the equation.
Okay. And then the fact that I think nobody knew that shows the interest that most people in the French Open.
Well, it just shows that the minutiae that we go into for this show, John.
Absolutely. Good reason.
All right. The gelding, who's still in Hawaii, comes back tomorrow, apparently, has sent a text through with his tips for Ballarat today, where the track's a soft 5, a rail in the true position. Now, last week's tips for the gelding, he had a winner in 2 seconds, and I think I sent a text to you, Paul, during the week for a $30 outlay, which is $5 each way on each horse, $56 return. So there was nearly 100% return on his investment last week. So hopefully the gelding can do just as well today.
I've told my mates into Bitcoin to get their money into their gelding instead of the Bitcoin. So.
All right. In race 3, he likes horse number 8, Star in the Mist. In race 5, he likes horse 3, Mixed Multi. And in race 7, he likes horse 11, Launchpad. So there's one for Omen Betters, Launchpad. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for battling through the technical difficulties you had today, Sarah. Hopefully you'll
No
have
problem.
that.
Thanks for waiting for me.
Hopefully you'll have that camera up and about by the next show. And to you and John and Paul, thanks for your participation today. And until next Sunday, everyone.